Okay, now we've turned on this sprinkler system. We charged the main line, ran through all the zones, checked for leaks, and now we're going to shut it down for the winter time. And if you hire somebody to winterize your sprinkler system, that's fine. I do a lot of it. But right now, I'm going to show you something you should do in case you ever have an early fall cold snap. This will, in '09, we had a lot of backflow preventers get broken because the homeowners didn't know how to bleed the pressure off of it to save this from freezing, because it got so cold at night before we could get there to winterize it, they didn't know what to do. So that's the first thing I'll show you, and then I'm going to show you how to winterize your sprinkler system. So the water's off inside, and I want to bleed the pressure off at your water source and your main line here. Okay? Now, we know that this is a check valve. So I'm going to bleed the pressure off the top, off the main line. Now I will bleed the pressure off this and open my hose spigot. Now what this does is taking all the pressure off these brass parts and your PVC. But that doesn't mean it won't break if it freezes. So I always bleed the pressure off, let it drain. And every once in a while, when you do this, a lot of water will, just like that. That's normal. Now, if you hire someone to winterize your system, like I was saying, you do this here, and you get an old blanket, and you cover up your backflow preventer like this. You'll be safe until the contractor gets there to winterize your sprinkler system. What this does is you have no pressure on your PVC or your brass parts or your copper. So if it does freeze, it has room for the water to expand. When it's under pressure and it freezes, it breaks faster. By putting the blanket around it, it insulates it from the warmth from the house and the ground, because you notice I'm draping this all the way to the ground. This keeps it warm. Then when the contractor comes up, he'll hook up his air and blow all the water out. And now that's the process that we will do now. Is I'm going to show you the type of compressor that I'm going to use with blowing out this system, and it would be the type of compressor that most homeowners would have. When I winterize sprinkler systems, I have a large one that puts out 80 CFM. A compressor in a home would be lucky to put out 10 CFM. But we can still winterize sprinkler systems with a compressor that you have at the house. Now, I wouldn't recommend a air compressor that's for like an air nail gun. It would need a tank, 10-15 gallons at least, and we would also, when I begin this process, you'll see how I do this. And but that's the main thing that you do. And also, if you hire someone to winterize your system, what I just did is very, very good to do. So now we'll move on over to the air compressor, and I'll explain some of that. Okay, what I have here is a typical Craftsman air compressor. And this is 30 gallons. I don't need a lot of air pressure to winterize a sprinkler system. I need air volume, and that's where the big compressors come in handy, is they have that air volume that you don't have to worry about turning the larger compressors on and off. This one I will be. You'll notice how I do this, because there's times that I'll have it off because I don't want too much pressure, and there's times when I want it on to run constantly. and I'll go over that. And like I was saying, you don't need a lot of pressure. I'm going to blow this system out at 50 pounds of pressure. I would never go over 80. The PVC parts, they just don't like to have that much air pressure. If you had a weak part, the PVC will break, and then it can get kind of dangerous. And that's the one thing about a winterization. If you come up and you winterize your system at 100 or 120 pounds pressure, and you happen to tap that PVC main line or something and it blows up, that's exactly what it will do. It'll blow up. And we want to avoid that. Air molecules act different on PVC pipe than the water molecules. The pressure that it gets exerted on the pipe is different. It is probably the best way I can explain it. Now, when I hook up to my sprinkler system where my hose spigot is, you'll just see how I made a little adapter that hooks right up to my air hose. Okay, real simple. A lot of times you'll have to take this and reduce to 3/4 to get to something like this, but you can find something like this at any hardware store. Now we've drained our water off of this backflow preventer. I'm going to hook up my air hose. Make sure my hose spigot is open. Pepcocks are closed. These little valves here. Now, this is the difference. When I have a larger compressor that's putting out more air volume, I can actually turn on the compressor. The air will rush in, push this plunger up to seal in the cap, okay, and then the air will rush into the main line. I can't do that with this type of compressor. I have to shut this valve. A lot of times you're going to have to do this too with a smaller compressor, but I'm going to turn on my air. Air will come up. It'll push this to close it, and I'll charge my air to this point. Okay. Now, if I turn on my compressor and you hear air coming out of the cap, that means that it doesn't have enough volume to push this closed. If that does happen, close this valve here, turn on your compressor, charge to this point, and then open this valve. Now push this closed and you'll be charged to this point. And then we fill our main line. So now what we're going to use is our air tank and our main line as our reservoir for air. And in this case, I'm going to turn the valves on one at a time, manually. And that'll allow that air that's in my air compressor and my main line to pass through that one valve. Sometimes when I have a larger compressor, I can winterize 2 zones at one time. With a smaller compressor, you won't be able to do that. So now we're going to turn on the compressor and charge to this point. Okay, I've got 50 pounds pressure in here. Now, what happened was when I had this valve open, I had my compressor running, it was leaking around here. So now I'm going to push this plunger up into the cap, and it'll seal this check valve. Now I'm charged from here. Now I'm going to charge my main line. Now I'm charged. My main line, backflow preventer, everything is charged behind the valves. Now before we turn on our zones, if you have any hose spigots by gardens, or your sprinkler main line is dead-ended anywhere in the yard, or you have some sort of area in your yard that's being watered by your lawn sprinkler system, you want to open those valves first. Make sure you flush that water out, and you'll need to check that again. That'll be the last thing that you check. And another thing to remember is that drip systems, you sometimes need to, I would definitely run them 2-3 times at least. They don't let as much water out. You need to make sure you get all the water out. Now remember that when I have a larger compressor, I have a larger air volume, I just use the controller to turn on my zones. Since I'm using a shop compressor with a lower volume of air, I'm going to turn on the valves manually. And if your compressor has a good regulator on it, you can set your regulator at a certain PSI and it'll stay there. And you won't have to be turning your compressor on and off. Now, valves, we know that we can turn them on 2 different ways manually, either by a bleeder valve or your solenoid. Now I'm going to use the bleeder valve on this here, and when I turn it on, you'll hear a sudden rush of air. And then I'm going to go turn on my air compressor. If your regulator is working good, you'll automatically turn your compressor on. Now once I turn on my valve, I want to make sure that my sprinkler heads pop up all the way, as if they're watering your yard, and they're pushing the water out of the lines. And always remember, one indication that you're losing pressure is the sprinkler heads start dancing up and down, or they don't come up at all. That means you need to go turn that valve back off, let the air pressure build back up, and then open it back up again. And once the water is coming out of the sprinkler heads, I'm always watching for the steady stream of water to persist. I want that to end. You're going to begin to see some, which looks like steam, coming out of the sprinkler heads. That's what you want to see, and when it's colder outside, you'll see more of that. Don't be confused with that being the water. It is water, but we want all of the sprinkler heads to basically be spraying that mist. Here with these 3 rotor heads, you'll see one of them start sputtering, and they'll start misting a little bit. We want all of the sprinkler heads to do that. It's very important. That's why I'm saying you'll sometimes have to go through your zones twice, because sometimes one of the sprinkler heads at the end of the run on the lateral line, it'll still have water in it, with the other sprinkler heads are either spitting out a mist or nothing at all. We want all of the heads to be acting the same way. Once you go through all your zones and you've taken all the water out of your main line and lateral lines, you're set to go. You just winterized your sprinkler system.